I guess. And all of a sudden, people found out that I'd been with the chapter. I must have received 20 or 25 congratulations on me being with AIA North Carolina from that place at the time, but I actually didn't even know it. So I've been coming here for 15 years, and I really love coming to mountains. Wow, that was cool. Okay.
You can't do that on a Mac day.
No, you can't. Wow. I'm still not switching, sorry. All right, there we go. Thank you. So I'm going to do just a couple of seconds here of prelim work, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and then I'll come back up and do the usual legislative update after he gets done with some of the chapter activities that are going on. But I wanted to do something first, which is sort of talk a little bit about what the state of the economy is, because what is really important to me, and it helps me a great deal as I go around the state, is to get a sense of just how things are going in the communities that we represent. So Dave and I have been to the Winston-Salem section, we've been to the Piedmont section, and we've asked these questions already. So the first thing I want to do is ask about your own economy. How is it going for your practices here in the Asheville area in the mountains? So by show of hands, how would you say that your practice is a little better than, or significantly better than it was a year or even 2 years ago? By show of hands. About the same? And then, is anybody's economy down for the last couple of years? Okay, that's a little different than we have encountered in some of the other sections. Mostly, everybody around the state are showing that things are a little bit or considerably better. And certainly in the Charlotte area and in the Triangle area, the economic indicators look very good. The data that we're seeing right now in terms of where the hottest markets are, clearly it's Charlotte for us. And I base that a lot off of how much work is going on in that area in particular. And also our retention, and what's going on with AIA North Carolina's membership retention. We just looked at the numbers yesterday because we have a board meeting tomorrow, and we'll have to analyze that for all of our board meetings. We have the highest rate of retention through January that we've seen in probably over 10 years. So that's a pretty good indication. The membership numbers as well from last year show that the Charlotte section actually added more members than anybody in the state. So clearly that's what's going on. The numbers you see up here reflect some of the consensus forecast for the industry nationwide. I just pulled this up. I think it might have been the CMD webinar middle of last year, what's going on. But this is pretty much a forecast of where things were going to go in 2016 as well. And really, just about all sectors are looking fairly good right now. The one sector that still is a bit anemic, but it's recovering a little bit, is the single-family home market, which I think some of you guys may be feeling here as well. Anyways, thank you for sharing that with me, because I do like to gather as much data as I can on just what the state of our own economy looks like here in North Carolina. So I'm going to bring David up, and he's going to talk a little bit about what's happening with AIA North Carolina, both from a 2015 perspective and this year. Do you want to move that? Sure. It works.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having us here. My name is David Libertore, and I'm with BSA Life Structures. And this past year, we concentrated on all different things on the board. We wanted to share that, and one of the big things was the repositioning effort that came down nationally. And what we, in a nutshell, did was engage in developing a memorandum of understanding through all the sections in the state chapter as to how each of us would be providing services to new members. I want to give a special thanks out to Jess. He did a great job in terms of We actually had to draft the document, and he took the lead on that and helped us get that ready to be sent off to the National Retreat in December. So those are the 7 areas that you're looking at where we have to decide how those services will be provided in each of the sections. I know you probably can't read this, but essentially what this is a matrix of each of the sections in the state chapter, as well as the foundation. And the checks represent that the particular section would be providing that particular service to the membership. And where you see some letters, that in most cases says AIA North Carolina, and that might be something that a local section is not providing, and so the state chapter would be providing that service. And we went all the way through in those 7 areas that were listed before, and we're going to come up with that proviso. Now we're heading into the accreditation phase from national, where we will have to show that we're actually doing it and providing these services. And if we get accredited, we can get accredited for up to 3 years at a time. What's important about all of this is, of course, money. It's all about revenue sharing. In the past, we have had revenue sharing based strictly upon document sales, and that was then distributed, a certain portion was distributed to each of the sections which did not do sales. And so in the past, it's only been the state chapter and the Charlotte section. That way of a portion of the money is going away, and part of the memorandum that we came up with is that both Charlotte and the state will still be doing that service, and so they will get some of the revenue sharing for that. But then each section will get revenue sharing based upon their membership. So it will be equal to each of the sections according to the number of members they have. The net effect of that was pretty simple. The state and Charlotte lost some revenue, and all the other sections gained revenue. Is it an idea report? Another effort that we undertook this year was trying to spread the activate effort.
You're quick enough. Make sure your volume's down.
See that? That's what I can't do with the map.
I was going the other way.
Yeah.
So if you go to the AIA North Carolina website, you can see the activated video, and I think probably many of you have. But essentially, what the effort is to try and spread what was started in Raleigh 2 years ago with Activating 14, which had to do with the address of the new CPAP building. But it's public awareness, public advocacy effort to let people know what we do. And the idea is that the more we let them know what we do, the more that we engage with them in public activity, the better chances there are that they're going to value our services. And that's better for all of us. So Erin Sterling-Lewis has been heading up this effort. She is our president-elect for next year for the state. And there'll be more coming on this in the effort to engage with each section throughout the state. The other thing that happened last year was the first year of our strategic plan. 2 years ago in the fall, Kevin Mayer led the effort to develop a new strategic plan. We decided not to do a 5-year strategic plan anymore, but to do it for 3 years because our lives just are changing too quickly. And so that this will try to keep it relevant. To that effect, we came up with 3 areas: advocacy, relevance, and composition. Previous slide noted the things in 2015 that we accomplished. A few of the ones I just wanted to highlight were up there, we're strengthening the relationship with House in an effort to try to get more exposure to our members who are doing residential design. Also, overall, is the establishment of resources criteria, and that's related to the Activate campaign. So that video is one of the first steps in it. And as I said, there's more coming out in the coming months. We also reinstituted pre-board section meetings. So at our board meetings, the first hour was a chance for the sections to get together and exchange what's going on in each of their areas. Again, the whole being that what some good idea, some good activity that one section is doing can spread to another. And then another one was to determine the organizational structure for AIA North Carolina and AIA Foundation. There's two components that I wanted to mention. One is that we streamlined the board for this coming year. Previously, both the president-elect and the president of each section were voting members. As well, we had other members that were voting members. And we had a board of over 30 people, and we could not have quorums. So we would come to meetings and we were not able to vote. So we streamlined it down to 17 as a board. However, all those people that were previously board members are still invited to the board meetings. We want them to come, we want them to be engaged, we want president-elects to learn what the board's all about. It's just each section has one vote instead of two. So far, so good. We had our first EXCO meeting, we had a forum, we were able to get something done. The second thing was to reestablish the AIA North Carolina Foundation in a meaningful way. And we didn't get that done. Repositioning was our focus. We took care of that. But we're going to be doing and concentrating on that this year. And it has to do with our nonprofit status and setting it up in the correct way so they can continue to fund things like Activate and other educational activities for membership. So that was one thing I mentioned we're going to do this year. A couple other things we want to concentrate on is the first one relates to the Activate effort, which I mentioned, really showing the return on investment that we get from political advocacy. Richard also is doing a make-up job. We're trying to organize less effect politically so that we can have more effect on the changes that are happening in Raleigh. Dave's going to talk a lot about some of the things that happened last year, some that didn't. And Richard is organizing that to get representatives from each section who can respond when a potential bill comes up and take a look at it, and according to whatever expertise you might have, give him a read on what we ought to do about it. Again, we're focusing on the brand identity, and another thing we're focusing on is measuring. That's something that I want to focus on this year. We lost a lot of architects because of the failing economy in the last 5 or 10 years. And I think we have to engage the younger generation coming out of school and get them involved in the profession in many ways as we can. So one of the things I want to try to focus on is reaching out to all of the colleges, and not just UNC Charlotte and NC State, but there's other programs in the state. They're not accredited for licensure, but there's some of those students will go on and go into programs where they could earn that, and then we don't want to lose them to other industries. And then the final thing is, again, is sharing between sections of the programs and what's going on in different areas, and try to focus on making good efforts become better efforts by collaborating. This year, our design conference is a regional conference, so we'll be doing that with Georgia and South Carolina. As the host chapter, we are in charge of sponsorships as well as logistics. Plans are now that the conference will be in Wilmington, September 29th and 30th and October 1st. Everyone, I hope that everyone can make it, and please put on and do your best command dances to keep it away. We want to have the design awards on the battleship again, so that's what we're planning to do on Saturday night. The last time, 2 years ago, it was on the battleship. It was quite a success. and they got a good calm evening. So we're hoping for the same this year, but we will have alternate plans as well. Other thing I'll say about the conference, and then I'll turn it back over to Dan, is that last year in Durham, the conference was all tourist, and it was very widely accepted as a success, even though the rain was terrible. People really enjoyed getting out and actually seeing work and learning about the process. So we're going to have a combination of that at SAR conference. We're not charging all of the content, but the local chapter, the Wilmington chapter, is very engaged, and they're helping to arrange some tours in and around the Wilmington area. So, unless you have any questions, I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Thank you, sir. So just backing up to the SAR Design Awards program, staff and I have concluded that our good luck charm with outdoor design events is actually Mike Cox. So Mike, you need to come, because when we did the Design Awards here in Asheville at the Biltmore, it couldn't have been a more gorgeous night. And I think in 13 you got the Dietrich Award and showed up on the battleship, and that couldn't have been a more gorgeous night. So I'm counting on you to come to SAR Design Awards, okay? I'm going to go through a little state of the chapter, and then I'll get into the legislative stuff. The slide that you see here is actually just recycled from last year. You saw this last year. I just changed the date because basically not a lot has changed in the last year. We still have very tight budgets that we're working with in the chapter, except for there was one significant change this year. Some of you might have noticed that your due statement was larger this year. The board did institute a dues increase this last year for a couple of reasons, which I'm going to go into in just a minute. But it's all structured and designed to help with not only cash flow, but essentially programming through the Activate North Carolina program. One of the things I do want to touch upon as well about Activate North Carolina, that really is the significant program for us for this year and the next few years going forward, is we're kicking off the statewide activity with a urban housing design competition. I'm going to release that tonight. The official start date of it will be February 24th, but essentially it's to submit for ideas in a design competition for unique urban housing. And it will be a site in Charlotte this time. We did one through Activate 14 last year for transitional housing for a very small site in Raleigh, but it was a much more focused event. This is going to be an international competition, and we expect probably over 200 to 300 submissions for this. We're already getting interest from around the country and around the world for this competition. So you'll see the announcement come out tomorrow. So probably won't send it till late tonight. The other thing David touched on, we had a really successful conference in Durham, which was great. We haven't actually made a whole lot of money on our conferences for about 4 or 5 years, but this one did very, very well because we kept our expenses down. The membership is stabilizing. I talked a little bit about some growth that we finally had earlier. A lot of that was in Charlotte, but a couple of the other sections did pick up some members. I actually think Asheville grew by a few members as well last year. And so things on that front are looking much better. We have continued our focus on residential construction as well, and we've got some ideas for a really interesting residential program this year. The board still needs to talk about it a little bit more, but we hope to expand upon the idea of promoting residential around the state. The other thing about the building, don't want to talk too much about it because I promised you guys last year we would try not to do that. But from the financial standpoint, the building, I think event venues find this out when they open. We didn't know about it because that's not the business we're in. But it takes a good few years to get some traction in the community. So every year we've had, you know, a budget line item for bookings of events at the center. And I think we started the first year with about $7,000 in revenue from bookings. Last year we hit over $25,000. And this year coming up, we've budgeted at least that much. We're probably going to be on our way to $30,000. So we're building a base. We're building a really core group of folks that like to use the building on a regular basis. We seem to be becoming a favorite location for wedding parties and some types of weddings for very unique brides. So it's been kind of interesting. The next thing I want to touch upon is the capital campaign. Actually, I'm going to talk about that later. So the other thing that we did last year, which is new for us, and I have to say it's probably one of the best programs we've implemented in a long time at the chapter, and that's the online webinar learning series. I see a number of people in the audience here today that are regulars on our monthly webinar learning series. And to be real honest with you, we put this in place for a lot of folks on the fringes of the state, so in the mountains and down east as well, because we know that you can't get to a vendor's office a lot of times, and the sole practitioners out there don't have the advantage of having an office where you know, the sales reps come and do brown bag lunches for you, or bring pizza in on a monthly basis. So this is the opportunity for us to give that to you all. It actually went over really, really well last year. We pretty much sell out our 100 spots, and we don't sell them because it's free for our members. But we've got 100 spots on our web provider that we book pretty much every month with this program. So we feel like we really hit a nice sweet spot with the online webinar learning series. The other thing we did is created a partnership with the Board of Architecture on some of our live classes. Now, we ran these mostly in Charlotte and in Raleigh. Yes, Jess?
Do you have any nominees directly from the presenter company?
Yes, we do. So the OWLS program was mostly designed to give continuing education free to our members, but we do make some revenue off of it because the presenters that come to us are actually, for the most part, AIA CES providers, and they're looking for this opportunity to get in front of the members. So we charge them $500 to do 1 month program. Now, the other aspect of that is if you do not take the program live and you access it through the database that's online, it's, I think, $20 or $25 for members to access it later on. We need to recoup some of those fees because there is a lot of technology involved in putting these things on, and so we have to pay for that technology and the storage and retrieval of those programs online as well. Thank you for asking that. The code seminars that we did with DOI this year, we went to the Board of Architecture and said, we are concerned that the Building Code Council has changed their adoption of the building code to a 6-year cycle. The Board of Architecture was really concerned about that as well. So, you know, the issue is, you know, while you have an obligation as a design professional to stay current with the codes, we know what the reality is. You rely on that book being published every 3 years to make sure that you're up to date with the ICC changes and the state changes and all of that. Well, this thing ain't going to be produced but every 6 years now if the Building Code Council actually sticks to their new schedule. So we felt as an organization, and the Board of Architecture felt as the licensing body for you all, that there's a huge opportunity for the licensees to miss a lot of code changes that are going on, because the Building Code Council meets every 4 months, they meet quarterly, 3 months, every 3 months, and they produce sometimes up to 30 code changes a meeting. So multiply that over, you know, the 4 meetings a year, so you've got 160 code changes times 6 years. Think about what's going into that code that you don't really stay up to date with. So we felt it was important to get the message out to our members, the architects statewide. So we entered into this agreement with the Department of Insurance to do regular code update programs for us. So we ran 2 of these last year. We'll do the same thing again this year. And we are videotaping them and putting them on our website. So you can go through our website to our provider that warehouses all of our online content, and you can purchase bits and pieces of those code changes. We don't want you to sit through 6 hours of video on your computer, but we pared them down into 1.5 hours or 2-hour segments based upon the section of the code. So they're there for you as well. We also wanted to update you all on legislative and regulatory issues, so those are on the website as well. We did 2 of those around the state. And we ran a very successful practice academy in Charlotte. We're doing it again in April this year. We do 6 segments of different practice areas with different experts in those areas. All right, so we talked a little bit about this last year, and here's where we stand right now with the paying off our what we call subordinate debt for our angel lenders. We need about $250,000. It's really about $230,000 at this point. And so last September, when the board met and talked about dues, it was clear that we had to come up with a program not only for the Activate North Carolina, but also to pay down our debt over the next 2 years. We have already extended our angel loans by 2 years, and so within the next 2 years, we have to pay down that debt. So here's what we did with the dues adjustment that we made in September. This graph that you see here, the blue lines are the repayment of the angel loans over the next 2 to 3 years. We hope to be able to get this paid down in 2 years with some additional fundraising as well from the capital campaign. But just in case, it's a 3-year projection that you see here. Every year, as we step that payment down, we're putting more money into public engagement, which right now we're calling the Activate North Carolina program. So for this year, we actually have about $30,000. That's about $10,000 from the new dues adjustment, another $20,000 from our budget to put towards Activate programming. So you can see by the year 2018 or 2019, about 100% of that will go into programming around the state. So what does that really mean? It means about $100,000 a year for dedicated staffing plus grants and also additional funding resources to our sections to put on these programs. So you guys should have representation on the Activate North Carolina Committee already, and if you do not, I think you guys do. I think, yeah. Lindsay's acting on the committee right now, so we're meeting on like every other month basis right now. So that's what's happening with the dues. So let me talk to you a little bit about the overview of the legislature. So how many of you attended our legislative day in March last year by show of hands? Thank you very much for coming, and I recommend and encourage more of you to come this year because I think I can honestly say last year was probably the most successful year we've had with our legislative day and overall our legislative program. These were the 4 issues that we really took up, and you need to know that we do this day, at least for the last 2 years, and we're going to continue to do it this year, with our partners in the engineering community, ACEC and PENC, and also the general contracting community, AGC. So we get together and we talk about what are the issues that are common to all of us in the design and construction community that we can go advocate for. Obviously, all of our organizations have some different focuses as well, but for the sake of getting the most bang for our buck and presenting a united front in front of the legislature, it's good for us to have coalesced issues. And these were the 4 that we had. Reinstituting the historic tax credits, getting some sort of infrastructure funding going in the state, because we've been without it for the last 15 years. Really focusing on transportation funding. Obviously, that's a big engineering and contracting issue. Not as big for us, but it's really big for the other players in the design and construction community. And then, as always, repair and renovation for state buildings. So here's how we did, just in a nutshell. I don't have to go into all of the things. We were able to get the historic tax credits reinstituted. Many of you who followed this throughout the year last year remember early in the year that the Senate put their fist down and said there's no way we're going to reinstitute tax credits. We don't believe in tax credits. We're trying to get rid of all the tax credits that are out there. It's a philosophical opinion that many on the Senate side and the Republican caucus have about restructuring our tax code. They feel that they need to flatten the tax code, they need to get rid of all the credits, and they need to get rid of income tax for both corporations and for individuals, and then institute additional sales taxes in various areas, which we'll talk about in a second. Through a lot of hard work of the Secretary of the Department of Cultural Resources, Susan Klutz, who is the director there under the McCrory administration, she was successful in putting together a very high-powered coalition, that included us, obviously, but about 25 other organizations as well. She traveled the state, as did many other people with her, and put tremendous amount of pressure on local legislators through the local press editorial boards. And it really started to drive the point home with senators that they couldn't ignore this issue anymore. We had the House from the beginning, but it was the Senate that continued to be the problem. In the end, we were able to reinstitute tax credit. One of the things I want to point out to y'all, it's on your table here. This is a brand new publication that AIA North Carolina is coming out with. Let's say quite brand new. We used to do a magazine, those of you who've been around for a while know we did a magazine monthly for many, many years, and then it went to every other month, and then it went to quarterly, and ultimately, as so many other print publications have gone this way, it sort of died its own death. But through some negotiations with our publisher, we've been able to create 2 more magazines a year now. This is the first one, so we wanted to do a legislative issue. In here, you're going to find a couple of things that may be of real importance to you. There's some other interesting articles in here about what happened last year, and the cost of doing nothing on repair and renovation. But more specifically, 2 things that you're going to want to pay attention to. If you do historic properties and you need to take advantage of the tax credits, on page 21, there is a cheat sheet on the new historic tax credits, and it looks like this. This was prepared actually by the Department of Cultural Resources and is a really good, quick and dirty on what the new law does. The other article in here that you're going to want to take a look at for basically business development reasons is the Connect NC bond article. This was the second major issue that we were successful with. Now, we started the year with the idea of trying to get a $4 billion bond project off the ground. Ultimately, it came down to, again, the Senate not wanting to issue that much debt, even though the state is carrying on its budget the ability to pay down way more than $4 billion in debt, but the Senate just didn't want to go there. So the negotiations came out to $2 billion. All of the projects that are contained in that bond are in this article as well. So if you're looking for what's coming down the pike in terms of public construction in the next couple of years, that's going to be right in this article. Transportation funding was really big. The House and the governor wanted to have the bond transportation as well. But the Senate, again, said, no, we're not going to do a bond. We're going to restructure the Highway Trust Fund. And many of you know that over the years, the Highway Trust Fund has siphoned off about $260 million a year from the trust fund to various other state funding activities. The Senate and the House put a stop to that this last year. They redirected over $260 million a year back from the trust fund into highway construction and transportation funding. So instead of just doing about $2 billion in bonding, which would last about 15, maybe 10 to 15 years, and we carry the debt for 20 years, we're going to get perpetual funding, supposedly, of about over $300 million a year in transportation money, which turns out to be a much better deal if, in fact, they actually continue to fund at that level than a bond would. So in that respect, I think the Senate actually probably did the right thing for a stable, more stable form of funding for transportation. On the repair and renovation side, I got a check mark there, and honestly, I've been meaning to change that because we really didn't get much in the way of repair and renovation. It was about $150 million, which is what they have been funding at for the last 10 years. They have not done a good job at all of funding repair and renovation for state buildings. In fact, many of the university campuses right now are talking about trying to pass their own student fees for repair and renovation because they simply can't get any out of the state at this point. And they're having a very difficult time. One campus has already done that, and they started this process probably about 6-7 years ago. UNC Charlotte actually does this already. It's actually been pretty successful for UNC Charlotte. So I would suggest that you're going to see in the next couple of years the campuses making a play with the Board of Chancellors to make that happen. And the thing I think that was the most disturbing for a lot of us in the industry was the loss of the renewable energy tax credits. That's going to have an immediate effects on business in the state. We do know of a number of energy developers that are planning to pull out of the state at this point. And so it's interesting to watch this debate about renewable energy tax credits because the surrounding states around us have been looking at how successful we've been over the last 6 years with our energy tax credits, and they're passing energy tax credits right now. South Carolina has just passed them, Virginia has some, Tennessee has some, but we're going back the other direction at this point. Jess?
Do you think that the renewable energy tax credits is not check mark because
You're talking about a trade-off with the historic tax credits?
Well, the trade-off with whatever from the dollar point of view or just flat negotiating whether the dollar cent.
It's a really good question. If you didn't hear that in the back, just said, you know, was it a trade-off for the dollars with all the other items we're looking at in terms of infrastructure and that? I'd say from the standpoint of how it's calculated in the budget, yes. Because when the budget writers look at tax credits, they're actually looking at a negative line item when it comes to budgeting. They don't take into account what's sometimes called dynamic budgeting, where you actually increase the budget because the incentive of the tax credit brings in more revenue. They don't look at that in the budgeting process, and so they just look at it as a negative line item. So you saw that happen with the film tax credits, primarily that affect the Wilmington area as well. So they just ceded the film grant now, it's not a tax credit anymore, to the tune of about $30 million. Well, they were running $300 million through the tax credit, but all the production companies have moved out of town. And so all of that revenue they were making is gone because the incentive is gone as well.
Is there any way they can see rather than using it to figure what they can have it for?
That is the $64,000 question for the lobbying corps in Raleigh, because we've tried to make it apparent the amount of money that is invested because of the incentive that is out there. And that those figures are there, they're empirical. And we've rolled all of those out. But there is a philosophical divide. And the difference that what you're told by those folks in the Republican caucus that are just adamant about this is that they're not in the business of picking winners and losers in government. And so the idea is if you lower the tax rates all across the board, everybody enjoys that rather than these special industries. So that's what we're up against. It's not a matter of not showing them the benefit of the incentives. They are there, and we've actually used that data. So a couple of things that didn't happen that you probably did not know about, and these are really good things for us. Everything revolved around the budget debate this last year. I will say, for the most part, we don't get involved all that much with the budget process most years because our issues tend to stay outside the budget other than maybe repair and renovation, or if we're talking about debt carry for a bond or something like that. However, because of the philosophical issues that were at play, the Senate wanted to tie absolutely every controversial issue this year to the budget process. And so these things all showed up in the budget this year. The idea of making it mandatory to use stock building plans for state buildings. That was in the budget. The idea of eliminating the ability to use LEED for state buildings showed up in the budget. There was a capital oversight committee that was created that would have basically stopped your project at schematic design and put you in a queue then with all other state funding to move your project forward. And it was a redundant oversight committee that was in the budget. All of those things we were able to negotiate out of the budget ultimately during the conference period. And I just want to give a shout out to a very good friend of the industry who is a Republican legislator from Union County. He is a structural engineer. His name is Dean Arp. It has been a godsend for us in this industry to have somebody sitting over in the legislature that's part of the majority that understands what you do and does it every single day. So he's gone to bat for this industry multiple occasions, and he was very instrumental in helping us strip these things out of the budget. The last thing is the change order authorization. I've got a slide on this, and I'll talk about it right now. I'll probably just blow through that last slide, but there was a senator who was brand new to the legislature in 2015. And he had served on the Richmond County School Board, and he was really upset that elementary school that he was building down there went $1 million over budget. And he was blaming it on the architects and on the contractors because they were authorizing change orders that didn't come before the Board of Education down there. So his initial bill would say any change order of $10,000 or more automatically had to go before the Board of Education for approval before the project. And you can imagine what that would do to a number of school projects. We were successful in derailing that this last year. It's still alive for this year. Don't be surprised if you hear something from me when they come back into session in April that he's trying to move that bill. But again, Representative Arp is helping us negotiate that one down to a manageable process for you all. So here's the bond. We've gone through that already. I won't go through all the details here because they are actually in the magazine and in that article. But essentially $2 billion, and the vast majority of that obviously is going to UNC campuses. Now, they needed to sell this across the state, so what did they do? Well, they basically gave every county some money for their community college districts, And then they went and put a lot of money into the park system as well. So there's hopefully, if this thing passes, it's gonna create some work. And I can tell you, when I got here in 2001, the $3.1 billion bond for UNC construction as well as community college had just passed, and we went through a couple of down years, 2001, 2002. It got a number of our firms through those down years. I will tell you, this will be a big help as well. Now, with that said, how many of you are familiar with the redistricting case that is now before the Supreme Court? Okay, a couple of you. Let me give you a really brief overview of what's happening. So you know that when the Republicans took control back in 2011, they went through a redistricting process. The entire redistricting for all of the House, all of the Senate, and all the congressional districts have been tied up in court all of that time. The Democrats have been suing under the Voting Rights Act. Just 2 weeks ago, the appellate court, federal appellate court, ruled that 2 of the congressional districts were drawn in such a way that it violated the Voting Rights Act. That was 12th district and the 1st district. One of them is a district that goes from Greensboro all the way down to Charlotte. As Representative Nikki Cho used to say, he could drive through the district with his windows open in his car and could high-five every one of the voters in the district. That's how narrow this thing is. The other is on the eastern part of the state, and if you've ever seen those lines, they're absolutely crazy. So the appellate court actually said, no, these are invalid, and you're going to have to redraw the districts. That immediately then was sent up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is expected to give a ruling any minute. I've been actually watching my phone to see if there's a ruling yet, but it has thrown the Republican leadership into disarray right now. For the last 2 days, they have been busy trying to redraw those 2 districts. So the question becomes this. I don't have an answer for this, but this is going to be fun to watch. If they have to redraw, which is looking pretty apparent that they're going to have to redraw the 1st and 12th congressional districts, what happens to the surrounding districts, and what happens to the voters in those districts? Now, keep in mind, absentee ballot voting has already begun for the March 15th election. There has been a prevailing attitude by many in Raleigh that the Supreme Court, because of the Republican majority in the Supreme Court, would stay the opinion by the appellate court in order for the election to continue on March 15th. Well, what happened on Saturday? So that throws a whole wrench with the demise of Justice Scalia into what that ruling might be. Because if the Republican majority had actually issued the stay, sure, okay, the election would go forward. But if you didn't know, if there is a tie on the Supreme Court, then the appellate decision stands, which means that those districts couldn't go forward in the election. So there's going to be movement here in the next 2 days. The legislature is scurrying around. There's a 4 o'clock meeting today on redistricting, but it will affect, I think, all of the election, probably not just those 2. So be watching for that. It's going to be interesting. It has an effect on the bond as well. Okay, I talked about long-term transportation. We talked about the energy tax credits. There are a number of other bills that were passed. I'm not going to go through a whole lot of these things because they are written in the article. We pulled most of this from the article anyways. But I went through some of these last night. So I'm told that the construction site fence issue that showed up in HB 44, which is the local government reform, actually emanated from here. So you all know what fence we're talking about here? 4 blocks away from here, yeah. So yeah, it requires, well, it puts some limitations on what local governments can require from the owner on the construction fencing. The state, just to let you know, every year since 2011, there has been 2 regulatory reform measures at minimum as they relate to design and construction, mostly on the engineering side and on the environmental side. This last year was no exception. 44 was the local regulatory reform, and the state regulatory reform was 765. Most of these things have to do with engineer work, less about architect's work, but you may encounter some of the issues that pop up here. I'm going to go through that, and we talked about the tax credit. The other thing I mentioned briefly, they did lower the tax rates again, the income tax rates. Corporate rate went from 5 to 4%, and individuals went down from 5.75 to 5.4. So in order to actually account for that reduction in taxes, you got to make it up somewhere. So what did they do? We've been telling you this for a long time. It is somewhat coming to fruition. They're starting to pick on services now to tax, but in order to actually make it less onerous on business owners, they picked on companies and businesses that already have an account with the Department of Revenue. If they were to come directly to professional services like architects and engineers and attorneys, you guys wouldn't know what to do because you don't already have to file sales tax with the Department of Revenue. Well, there are some services that do, and those are services that also offer a product for sale. So think about auto repair. That's the classic example. You go and you take your car to get serviced. They charge you sales tax on the oil filter that they're putting in your car, but they haven't charged you sales tax on the labor that goes into that. Well, now they will. So they are picking off those sorts of services, and I suspect we may see one more attempt to roll in some professional services this year when they come back in April, primarily because the biggest champion of this has announced his retirement, Bob Ruccio from Charlotte. And his full intention was to eliminate sales tax or income tax altogether, and what he calls broadening the base. The only way he can get there is by attacking professional services. Keep your eyes and ears open. We'll see. Talked about the budget already. I'm not going to go into that. I think those are pretty much because I'm thinking you're going to want me to wrap up here pretty soon since it's 1:08. Regulatory, the building code, regulatory reform. Just want to hit on this a little bit. This was the home builders Christmas list. They've been after a lot of local regulatory reform, especially in inspection agencies for a very long time. Most of what they did in this bill is actually favorable to what you all do, especially if you work in the residential area. A couple of things that you might want to keep an eye on, though. One is this language they put in at the very last 11th hour of the bill's adoption, which allows building elements designed by licensed design professionals to forego inspection by the inspection department. This was not intended to be the whole residence, basically. This, as it was explained to me by the Home Builders Association, is a frustration that they've been having, their members have been having, with inspection departments that come out to a home site, and these are generally large structures, and they're dealing with long spans. And they're asking the builder to go get engineering calculations for these long spans. They come back with the engineering calculations, and the inspection department disallows the seal of the licensed design professional. So that's the frustration that the home builders have been having, that this language was attempting to get to. Now, with that said, after this was passed, a lot of local inspectors have been calling the Board of Architecture saying, what the hell does this mean? We don't know how to interpret this. And it's likely you might encounter local building officials that may have this issue as well. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. What's the fix for this? Honestly, having called the Board of Architecture, we've got some standard language that Kathy Evans has worked out that says, here's how we interpret it. You know, it's a state law. We didn't do it, but here's how we interpret it. So you can point them in that direction. Yeah.
Question on that. If you design something, size things, stamp on it, and it's out of there, and they don't want you to cite or not. You want the design, you want the inspectors
To accept it. Yeah, you do.
And to inspect it, not just to,
Right.
I mean, essentially their protection.
Now, I don't think this statute will prohibit the inspection, but it will mean nothing. So as a licensed design professional, you should probably want that and take that input, because ultimately it's going to be your liability. And another set of eyes is usually not a bad thing, but it's the holding up of that project that certainly the home builders are trying to get around. But there's no requirement to accept what the inspectors come back with after that. So use your best judgment, I'd say. The other thing is it creates two separate code committees on the Building Code Council, one for residential and one for the building code. Essentially what this does is it gives complete control of the writing of the code to the residential committee on the residential code side, and then to this building committee on the building code side. This was an attempt 6 years ago to bifurcate the Building Code Council into two separate bodies. That didn't work. And the home builders came back this year to attempt the same thing, just within the existing structure of the Building Code Council. So the initial concept here was just for the residential code to move into this committee. I stopped it at that point and said, if you're going to do that to the residential side, then we're going to do it to the building side as well. And you can imagine what the makeup of the residential code side is. It's all a bunch of home builders. So we've tried to exclude home builders on the building code side. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. You done with me right now? Because okay.
Want to take questions?
Yeah, I'm always happy to take questions. The other thing, just on the aesthetic control side, y'all have heard about this for a couple of years. This was another home builder issue. They were able to get it through this year, but basically any zoning and development regulation that relates to 1 and 2 family construction cannot have aesthetic language in it. So the city can't control aesthetics through the zoning code. Yeah. It does not. It exempts historic districts. It also exempts planned communities that have CCNRs. So you can do it through the CCNR process.
Is that particular one the result of the charity residence?
It is not. It actually started long before the charter residence. For those of you who don't know about that, where that has ended up, yesterday the appellate court ruled in favor of Lewis and Marcia. So the only place left for the neighbor to go is the state Supreme Court. Remains to be seen if she's going to take it there. Mike.
What is legislative day this year?
Legislative day is May 11th. I hope that's right. I'm pretty sure it is. The reason for that is the legislature said they're coming back early. Normally they would come back in mid-May and then we would push legislative day off to June, but they said they want to come back in April this year. So we're going to push that out until May 11th. They want to get the hell out of Raleigh as soon as they can, because as the governor stated a couple of weeks ago, the longer the legislature is in session, the lower my favorable ratings go down. So they want to get out. They're not going to do a lot. They're going to have to tweak a few things like the budget and things like that. Don't expect wholesale changes this year when they come back. Yeah. Yes.
buildings not to require architectural seal as a professional review.
Yeah, so I didn't spend any time on that, but Amy, thank you for bringing that up. So what that was all about had again to do with, it really wasn't the home builders that brought this up. This was done, let's see. There it is, exempts commercial buildings. So what happened was the County of Iredell brought an issue to the Building Code Council that they wanted to exempt $90,000 worth of work in an interior mall from the requirement of having a seal licensed design professional. It was a tenant upfit issue. So the Building Code Council said, well, that's fine. We don't think we have purview over dealing with this. 2 days later, the chairman of the Building Code Council shows up in this legislative committee with this language and inserts it into this bill without anybody knowing what was going on. So what the language said was exempts commercial building projects of less than $90,000 or 2,500 square feet from the requirement of professional architecture seal. The committee looked at that language and they said, well, why don't we just change it to and, which basically changed the whole meaning of the statute. And I sat back because we were not in favor of it at all, and I got up and spoke against it without even knowing what they were attempting to do. And they said, well, let's change it from interior malls and just make it a blanket exemption, and then we'll put and in there. Well, once they put the and in there, it sort of negated the whole thing. And at that point, I sat down. So we ran this by the Board of Architecture. They've looked at it. They said, yeah, we think that essentially it's negated, and it really does not mean anything. So they didn't accomplish what they were trying to do originally with that. But I did want you guys to know. Thank you for picking that one up. There's no doubt about it. You're absolutely right. Yes. And the board is very concerned about it, both our board, the AIA board, and the Board of Architecture as well. Jane.
Especially in commercial building, a lot of life safety issues happen from $90,000.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, we made the point to, fortunately, this did not exempt the project from being inspected. So if you're not meeting your exiting requirements and your fire requirements and all that kind of stuff, then whoever is the unlicensed person doing this is hopefully going to get caught by the building inspection department. I don't think the building inspectors wanted this either, quite frankly. It's just some guy in Iredell County that wanted it. Okay, thank you all.
Thank everyone for coming today. Just want to recognize our three sponsors that were here. I think two have already left.
ECS is having a client appreciation at Barley's Tap Room.
Okay. Matt Fogelman with ECS just informed me that there's an event at Barley's Tap Room, client appreciation event this evening, and beer with free beer at what time? 5?
5 to 8.
Yeah, 5 to 8 after work.
5 to 8. Stacy Fields and Marcel Millwork, I think she left already, and Kelly Morehouse with Candace, I think she left as well. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah, just stand there and act like you're talking.
Just stand there and act like you're talking. Okay.
And then I can take a screenshot and stick it into the video when you come up. Appreciate it.
I've got to mention it before.
Just remind me.
All right.
We actually moved to Oakland a couple days. There you go. Wanted to know what. Yeah, I've got a conversation. Yeah, he's different. Not that I heard
If they don't get back after we sent these invitations, that we should just go get a bunch of Dunkin' Donuts and they have a place to go. Just show up every day.
the maze or panels.
We got, I think we should preempt it.
Well,
We gotta get it in.
we're gonna moderate it. Topics.
That's not. Well, that'd be good. When that happens, we'll make sure and have, some microphone batteries, some fresh microphone batteries. The way that, since we didn't use that Dave's computer, I think this would be a good, first video. So the members that came, they and then, so it'll put us on the schedule.
Change it. $5. More. So we got paid for it. And it's not that much.
Hey, we're gonna have to bleep that, man. Got a live mic up here. I didn't pick it up. More bet. Hot mic. Hot mic.
Yeah, next month we gotta get people here. Because, it's gonna be another tactic. We should start it.
Do you have any parting words for the Hangout? How about you? Do you want to do a form and function architecture advertisement on the Hangout?
No, I don't need more words.
We need a sponsor. You can sponsor our YouTube channel.
Only if I get to pick the content that goes on.
You can do that.